Hey everyone, Rebecca Stone here, and I'm in Lightroom today to show you how I edit a flat lay. And if you joined me on my Instagram live, you will probably recognize this flat lay from the demonstration that I did. So follow me along. We're going to go through and I'm going to show you every single step that I do in order to edit a flat lay according to my brand. Flat lays do take a little bit of extra time, mostly because the texture of the flat lay mat or surface just needs to be softened a little bit, especially if you're working with one like this, which is velvet. So we're just going to go ahead and jump on in. I'm in my develop module in Lightroom, and first thing I'm going to do is crop. And I am not opposed to cutting off objects in my frame, but I want to make sure that my audience's perspective, their eye is always being drawn toward the invitation. The invitation doesn't always have to be in the center of your flat lay, but that's just the most common for me. So once I've found a spot that I'm pretty happy with, I like to leave a little bit of room around the edges. You can tell up here where the binoculars are almost on the edge, and then down here where the stamps are. I'm not opposed to cutting them off, but I just feel like for this image it works a little bit better if you can see them. So when I photographed this, I had to adjust this postcard here with the canoes a few times just because I'm working with a 35mm lens, and it does have a natural vignette and a natural little bit of a fisheye that happens because it's a wide angle lens, which we are actually going to adjust here in Lightroom because you can tell it's just a little bubbled, so the center of the image is just slightly protruding a little more than the rest of the image. And that's not a horrible thing. It's probably one of those things that I notice and nobody else does maybe, but if you're like me and you're picky about the distortion of your images, this is probably something you want to pay attention to. So the preset that I use for all of my photos, unless I'm doing black and whites, is my classic preset, and this is a very, very tweaked version of Maston Labs Ektar. I've just kind of tweaked it over time to my preference. Got to turn my volume off, getting a couple text messages. So what I'm going to do first is adjust my white balance, which is my temp and my tint, and I'm going to try and get it to that sort of warm, balanced. Maybe adjust the exposure a tad, and you can tell with this preset it has increased the texture of the velvet here, and it's probably because I have my clarity slider here on 10, so I'm just going to bring it back down to 0 until later, well, when I'm going to go back in and adjust that a little bit more. So for now we're just going to mess with temp and tint, find a happy place. It's not going to be perfect. We're going to have to color correct a few spots. Over here on the left, you can tell that it's also a little underexposed because it was closer to the wall. It's not a huge deal, as long as you know how to fix it. So over here, I'm going to take my graduated filter, and I'm going to drag it right about there. That temp down to 0 because it was set too high, and then I'm going to raise the exposure a tiny bit. You can also probably tell that this is a lot more saturated of a mustard color than this over here. So I am going to bring the temp down slightly so we can start color matching according to the rest of the matte color. So I'm bringing in my tint a little more toward my greens. My temp is at -6, my tint is at -3, my exposure is at 0.24. These are just minor adjustments that I make. I'm not particular to any kind of number adjustment. It doesn't have to be an even number for me. I'm not that particular. All right, so next thing we are going to do is take another graduated filter from the right bottom corner. Reset these settings because I just copied it from my previous, and I'm actually going to bring the exposure down just a tad. Before I go on any further, I do want to go down to my transformation panel, or actually, sorry, my lens correction panel first, and go to Profile. We are going to click Remove Chromatic Aberration. We are also going to click Enable Profile Corrections. With a 35mm, this is typically a pretty dramatic correction, and if you're trying to figure out with your 35mm why it has that natural vignette, that is why. You need to come down here and enable profile corrections. That looks pretty good to me. I don't think I need to do any more transformations. You can come back here to crop and get a little bit of a smaller grid to see if you need to adjust anything vertically or horizontally. I am surprisingly really happy. This never happens. I usually have to do a lot in transformations, but I think I was able to get above my flat lay mat almost perfectly. And honestly, if you're having issues with photographing flat lays, you feel like you just can't get above them quite enough, I always widen my stance. I turn on my live view. Live view saves the world. And I am then able to make minor adjustments in my stance and my position by being able to look at the back of my screen. And I work with a Canon 5D Mark IV, in case you were wondering what camera I use. It's a big, heavy beast, but I love her. So what I just did was took my brush and I went over the invitation just because my whites, I automatically, with this preset, the highlights are reduced by a lot because I don't want to lose any detail, and that's just a personal preference because of the way that I edit. So what I usually have to do is come in with a brush for my whites and always just warm them up a little bit. For this image, it looks, everything's pretty good except for the invitation, so you can tell I just brushed over the invitation. I'm going to bring in some warmth there. And then I'm also going to raise my white slightly, and I'm going to increase the contrast. Maybe the clarity a little bit too. Okay, so I don't know if you can tell, but right here along this edge, you can see a little extra chromatic aberration that wasn't removed. It's a little purple. So we are going to come back down to lens corrections. We're going to go into the manual panel. And you can tell here that the slider is already on the purple hue, so we are just going to drag it over until I'm happy. That looks a lot better. Perfect. Let's see if there's anything else we need to fix. So right here along the ring, not super noticeable. However, I would like to try and remove it if I can. So I'm just making minor adjustments here in my transformation panel. I don't think we're going to be able to find a happy medium for all the chromatic aberration. I'm just a little particular, so I'm going to come in and select the edges where I see that little bit of purple. I'm going to bring it over here with my tint toward my green and toward my yellow for my warmth. There's also a little spot right here of fluff that I need to remove. Perfect. All right. After that, what I'm looking at now is that the envelope here just has a little bit too much texture. So I'm going to come in with my brush tool and I am going to select my envelope. It doesn't need to be perfect. The selection, I mean, not the image. I'm a little bit of a perfectionist, so some of this for you guys might be totally unnecessary. You could have been happy with the image about 12 steps ago, but just for my personal preference, I try to make it my very best. So I'm going to drop the shadows a tiny bit. I'm also going to come down to texture and bring the texture down. Do you see how much that helped? Here, I'm going to zoom in so you guys can see. Oh, hang on, I need to select this first. Here we go. And down here, texture. Yeah, it's a huge difference. Texture, the texture slider is one of my favorites to use. Also, if you end up brushing a little too much, you know, kind of like over the edges like I did, just come over down here, click erase. Make sure that you obviously selected the brush selection that you're wanting to remove, and you can just come back down and correct the edges where you went a little overboard. Perfect. Wonderful. All right, so looking at the rest of the image, I'm pretty happy. I would like to brush the exposure on this postcard down just a tiny bit and increase the clarity. So we're going to come over here again, reduce exposure. Let's see, I'm at negative 0.29, and I'm going to increase the clarity to 10. Very good. All right, so we're nearing the end of our edit. So I'm going to come in, this is an older invitation that I had for a previous wedding in 2019. So I'm going to come in and clone some of the edges just because this invitation is a little older. And it's been in my flat lay bag, and I want it to just present as well as possible. I might not be able to clone that part, so I'm going to come in with my brush, and right here on the edge you can just tell that it's slightly rolled in because it's been stored. And I'm going to reduce the exposure a tad. When you make a small brush like that, the pen is sometimes in the way, so you can hit never so it goes away, and then keep reducing from there. Ooh, too much. It might just be something that I'm not able to completely correct, which is okay, but I like to try. Sometimes you just have to be okay with it not being perfectly perfect. I love this tray because of its distress, but there are some little scratches and spots on it that can be a little distracting. So I like to come in and try and clone those out if I can, or heel. I'm using the heel selection for the brush. Needs to be moved to a slightly different spot. Good. So I'm just going to continue removing these little blemishes on the tray, which is just a personal preference. You don't have to do that. If you like the way that your tray is distressed, just keep it. Or if it doesn't bother you, go for it. All right. The rest of the distressed areas are fine. I am now noticing that it looks like there's a pretty big scratch here on the right side. So I am going to go in and correct that just a bit. I think the more that you stare at an image, the more you want to fix it. Sometimes it's better to just stop and walk away, right? Or if you're having an issue with an adjustment, you can't figure it out, just take a break. And then typically when you come back, you'll see what you need to fix. just need a break sometimes. All right, that is looking pretty darn good to me. I love this tray and I love its details, so I am going to come in with my selection tool and I am going to brush on a mask. Again, a totally unnecessary step for most people. For me, because I'm sitting here and I have the time and I'm only editing one photo, of course I want it to look my best. All right, so now that that is selected, I'm going to increase my warmth on it a little bit, and my contrast, and my saturation. That's looking really beautiful. All right, so now it's time to turn our attention to the back, the flat lay mat itself. Again, the mask tool, my very best friend in the entire world. We are going to create a mask on the flat lay mat itself. Again, don't worry about perfect edges, just get a rough mask on there, and then we can go back in and erase anything that we over selected. And there are probably some spots that don't really need the mask. If they look pretty smooth to you, then you don't need to worry about selecting them. Velvet is a very, very expressive fabric, which is a good thing and a bad thing. So if you're working with a velvet mat, this is probably something that you need to get comfortable with. And also, you know, if you can handle it in person and not have to fix it in Photoshop or Lightroom later, do that. It's always better to fix an issue in person versus saying, screw it, I'll just fix it later. Because sometimes it's not fixable. All right. So you can tell I just over selected just a tiny bit over here on the postcards and the ring boxes. So I am going to come in with my erase and fix those little edges so that way I don't lose any texture in those postcards that I just added. Let's see, anywhere else, maybe here. Here on the watch. Here. Cheesecloth, and then up here. Done. All right, so I forgot that I removed my spots. There they are. All right, so we're going to select the mask that we just put onto the background. Unselect the show selected mask area. So now we are going to bring the texture down. And the clarity just a little bit. Clarity I feel like is a little goes a long way. It also can damage your highlights, so be careful of that. I'm happy right about there. It looks like I might have missed a tiny area right here where it might just need a little extra. And there will be some spots where you're like, ooh, I need a little bit of extra texture removal. So I'm going to create a second mask on top for some areas, like here by the postcards. Pretty much this whole left side, mostly because the exposure on that side with natural light was just a little bit less, so it did pull out a little more texture. And then here by the stopwatch, I might just spot remove that funky shadow. Here, here, here. All right, so let's bring that texture down for those areas. And I'm actually going to increase the exposure just a tiny, tiny bit because that'll help with the detail of it, if you just raise the exposure a tiny bit. All right, so I'm gonna come in and mask or heal a couple spots. Again, probably a totally unnecessary step, but I like to do it if I am able. This is a great way to also remove fingerprints if you left any. Good. Well, any like dark spots where you can tell maybe I shifted some items and it left a tiny print. I just don't want any distracting spots. All right, I'm looking, man, yeah, this is good stuff. I don't think I've ever had a flat lay that was this perfect as far as the angle that I photographed it. So high five for me, I'm proud. All right, sorry, had to just go in and do one last tiny little adjustment before I declare this officially edited. One final thing that I will do, remember I removed clarity in the beginning. I'm gonna come back in and put it back in. This is at about a 10. I'm also going to increase my contrast to plus 77. I'm gonna reduce my blacks a little bit. I love a good strong shadow. And then I can tell that there's one spot where I probably brushed it with my nail accidentally. And then I see another little spot here on the teacup. Perfect. Well, this is looking pretty good to me. Let's just make sure that we're straight. I am going to bring it in just slightly. I don't want to cut off the edge of that though. This is looking so beautiful. So this is the before, the after. Oh, you know what? One thing that I'm not too keen on is how the mustard yellow kind of got a little green. So to correct that, I'm going to come down here to my yellows, and I'm going to bring this slider back over toward the orange a tiny, tiny bit. I'm also going to take my orange slider and bring it back over to the yellows a little, and then increase that luminance. You see over here on the left side, it helps a lot by increasing luminance. I'm just going to keep inching. Much, much better. And then with this graduated filter, I am going to lift it a tiny bit more. And I'm going to rotate it slightly. Let's see. If I gave myself permission, I could honestly sit here and keep adjusting, but I am happy with this. This is absolutely a deliverable product for a client. Before and after, looking really, really beautiful in my opinion. Thank you guys so much for joining and tuning in while I edit this flat lay. If you have any questions for me, you are welcome to DM me on Instagram at RebeccaStonePhoto, or you can send me an email at hello@RebeccaStonePhotography.com. If you want to see any tips in the future or have any further questions, or maybe just want to watch me actually photograph a flat lay so you can see exactly how I do it, just let me know. I would love to hear your thoughts. Any feedback is appreciated. And beyond that, I hope you guys have a wonderful day.